and welcome back to Home Emmanomics. Now today I would like to teach you how to make a salmon chowder. Just last week I went fishing and I noticed that when the fishermen come back from the river or the ocean and they're getting the fillets off of their fish, they just dispose of the carcasses and the heads and all that beautiful meat that really could be used. Myself and quite a few other people stood around and waited to see what would happen with those carcasses, and were ready with bags. And basically as soon as that fillet was pulled off of there, they could place those carcasses in our bags. And this is how much meat I got from one head. There's a lot of great meat inside the head of the fish. So I just roasted the head in my oven at 400 degrees for about an hour until it was ready. And then I picked off all this meat. There was a little bit more earlier, but some of it got eaten. And then the rest of the fish is really great. I mean, there's the bones, which I made a broth out of here. So you can actually see there's some bones in there, there's some fins, and I made a broth out of those. I just put it in my Instant Pot with the bones and some water and a little bit of salt after I smoked them. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted to make a smoked salmon chowder this time. So before I took the meat off the bones, I sliced that carcass into pieces, and then I used a recipe to create a really nice smoked salmon in my smoker. Then we took the meat off of the salmon, and this is the meat that was just from the carcasses that were left over. And that, again, is not all of it because we ate some of it already. This is smoked salmon just from what was thrown away at the boat docks. So what I'm gonna do is take this broth, and I'm just gonna put it through a strainer. So I'm just gonna separate the bones from the broth, and then I'm gonna use this smoked salmon broth in my chowder. Instead of butter and using bouillon, this is a vegetable bouillon, instead of using those, I'm gonna actually use the leftovers from my French dip sandwiches that I made a couple of days ago. So there's a lot of good fat on the top of it, and then it's got this really great broth on the bottom, and it's concentrated. So I'm gonna use this to kind of flavor my salmon chowder. And other things that you will need to make this recipe is cream. I separated the cream from the milk from our cow. Some dill from your garden or from the grocery store. Some salt and pepper. Some bell pepper, and it can be any color you want. I just had red on hand. Some flour, again, any kind you have. Some corn, I shucked it right off of the cob earlier, but you can take frozen corn or canned corn, whatever you have on hand. Shredded carrots, that was about 3 large carrots. This is 2 onions, and this is, I don't know, a whole bunch of potatoes to fill this bowl. And then some celery, and I used elephant garlic, which is not as strong as regular garlic, so I added a little extra in here. You might use just a couple cloves of garlic. And we're gonna get started. So now that I've strained the bones from the broth, this broth is gonna be ready to go. So to start, you'll wanna put maybe a quarter of a stick of butter, sometimes more. I like it richer, so I'd put the whole thing in, but it's up to you, into your pot. And then the bouillon would be used in place of the extra sauce that I have here. If you find that your salmon broth is not strong enough, you can add some bouillon to it. But I'm gonna use this. So I'm gonna take the fat off the top, put that in my pan, and then we're gonna start heating it up. I'm gonna take my onions and my garlic, probably my celery and my bell pepper, and we're gonna get ready to throw those in as soon as it gets hot enough. All right, so that fat has melted down, so I'm gonna go ahead and add my onions and celery and bell pepper. And usually I let the onions go for a little while first, but my kids are hungry, so I'm just putting all 3 in right now. I tend to do the onions first until they get translucent, but I have very hungry kids. So it's time to get started with this. I'm gonna rush it a little bit and add the garlic. It's fine. It'll always be fine. You can't make too bad of a mistake in cooking as long as you know what you're doing. At this point, I like to add a little salt and pepper. Not all of it, because you might want to add a little more later depending on taste. Woo, onion eyes. Once your veggies are tender, go ahead and add your potatoes and your broth. Basically, you just need enough broth to cover the potatoes, but I want to use it all, so it's going to be an extra brothy chowder, if that's okay. I'm going to add the rest of my au jus. At this point, you might want to add some of your bouillon. I like Better Than Bouillon organic. I think it's really tasty. It adds good flavor to things. Also has a nice salt content that's just about right. And then you're going to let that cook until the potatoes get fairly soft. And then we'll add some corn and the carrots and the salmon and make it thick for a chowder. Now is a great time when your potatoes are soft to add your corn and your carrots. And your chopped dill. If you don't have fresh dill, you can use dry dill, but use fresh if you have it. There we go. Stir that up nicely. Now while that's cooking a little bit, I'm going to prepare my kind of like roux. So I'm going to take the cream and the flour. I think that's about a half cup of flour or so. It just depends on how thick you like your chowder. If you find that it's not thick enough, then you can just add more. But don't add the flour without the cream stirred in. Otherwise, you'll get chunks in your soup, and you don't want to do that. So now I'm ready to thicken up my soup. This is a great time to taste your soup and add any extra seasonings that you want. If you didn't use smoked broth, you can always add smoked paprika if you want to add that extra smoked taste to it. I'm going to just add a little more pepper and a little more salt to mine. I already tasted it, so I know that it needs a little more salt and pepper. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and add my salmon. I'm going to use all of the head meat. It's already been shredded up. So this is a salmon head. So much good meat that it just gets thrown away unless somebody takes it. And I was really happy to see that I wasn't the only one at the docks taking the carcasses. There were other people there that realize how much meat is left on that fish. And not everybody has the ability to get on a boat and go fishing. So it's kind of a nice way to get some free salmon meat when you can't afford to do it yourself, because excellent home cooking should be affordable for anybody. And sometimes that means going to the docks and taking the carcasses. I'm going to add a little bit of the smoked salmon. I do want to keep a lot of this for eating because it's delicious, but I want to add a little more smoked flavor to my salmon, so I'm just going to use a little bit of that. If you make smoked salmon with some of your salmon carcasses, it's also great in putting in cream cheese, eating by itself, putting in soup. All kinds of great things can be done. All right, so we're going to bring that back up to boil. And when it starts boiling, that's when I'm going to turn off the heat a little bit. Well, turn it down. And I'm going to add my cream and flour mixture to kind of thicken it up at the very end. And then it'll be finished. So I've let it cook for a little bit and it's back up to boiling. I'm going to turn down my heat a little bit. And I'm going to add my milk or my cream and flour mix. And I'm just going to start stirring that in. And you do still want your heat to be on because it does need to cook it a little bit, but it doesn't need to be boiling at this point. and it's gonna thicken up quite nicely. If you find it's not thick enough, mix a little bit more in your bowl and pour it in. If you find it's too thick, just add more milk or cream. You don't have to add more cream, you can add milk if you want. In fact, if you don't have cream, you can add milk, but it's just not gonna be as rich. And once it's thick, it's ready to eat. So we just made a smoked salmon chowder from leftover carcasses from the boat docks and veggies from the garden. Thank you for joining us in another Home Emmanomics episode. Click that button that says subscribe so you can keep getting these videos.